Today I'm going to be doing a retubing and biasing on this Marshall 1959 100 watt SLP reissue. And there's not a lot of videos for how to do this safely and with absolutely no knowledge at all. So I just wanted to give a few pointers and helpful tips and kind of safety tips to help a first timer or even somebody who feels confident doing this but just wants some maybe a different approach. This is my amp, and I absolutely love this amp. It's one of my favorite amps of all times. But I want to show you how simply you can retube and bias this. Biasing tube amps is kind of a scary process for a lot of people because you hear about the voltages can kill you and you can get really shocked, and all this is true. However, if you take some simple safety procedures, you stay focused, you work neatly, and you really pay attention to what you're doing, you can actually do this safely and save yourself hundreds of dollars from a repair shop. So the first couple things you're going to need, one of them I recommend is called a bias probe. This is basically nothing but a tube socket that has pins on one side to go into your existing tube socket, and then you're going to put your tube into the top of it, and then it has a pair of leads that's going to lead to your multimeter. That's the next thing. I recommend you have a good multimeter, analog or digital. These Radio Shack digital ones are really nice because they're auto detecting, so you don't have to set a range. You just have to set the generalized category that you're going to be measuring. I have two of these because I like to use them at the same time for biasing tube amps. So some screwdrivers here. I use electrician's screwdrivers. These are meant for working around voltage. They're all plastic, and you're going to need a very, very small flathead screwdriver, plastic. Don't use metal screwdrivers, and if you only have a metal screwdriver, make sure it has a plastic handle. You do not want to be sticking metal tools poking around inside of an amp with a metal tool. It's just you're just looking for issues. So, but you're going to need a very, very tiny, like a micro flathead. We're going to be retubing this today with 4 Svetlana EL34s. I'm actually doing some tube rolling in this amp. This is the 4th set of tubes I'm going to try. And whenever you switch power tubes, you have to rebias your amp because a lot of them are rated differently. Right now I have a set of KT77s from Genelex. They're Gold Lions in there. Super expensive tubes, and I like the sound of them, but I want to try this other set that a friend of mine gave me. So the ones that are in there are rated for 32 watts. These are rated for 26 watts, or we could do 25 watts. So that's why you have to rebias your tube amp when you switch power tubes. If you're only switching your 12 AX7 tubes, your preamp tubes, you do not have to rebias the amp. Although sometimes preamp tubes can sound slightly different when the bias is changed, but you don't have to bias for your preamp tubes. Another thing you're going to need is a speaker load. On my workbench here, I keep a THD hot plate. This is the 16 ohm model. I do a lot of amp biasing for other people and constantly kind of messing with my own stuff. So I bought one of these just to keep on the bench because I don't want to move my speaker cabinets, and when you're working on an amp, biasing an amp, you absolutely still have to have a speaker load. So you can bring your cabinet over and plug it up while you're doing this whole procedure, but I find it easier. You can get these on eBay relatively inexpensive nowadays, but I keep this on the bench. I also have a 8 ohm version, but the 16 ohm, most amps you can use the 16 ohm version. So we're going to be using this as our speaker load, and then we're going to need the power cord, which I just keep plugged in here on the bench. They all use the same power cord. So you're going to need those 2 things, and then you'll be ready to start. So the first thing we're going to do is take off this back plate. this particular 100-watt super lead, I've actually, I don't use the effect loop, so I had it modified to have a master volume switch because it is ungodly loud. So, and cranked up, these things sound amazing, but who the hell can crank this thing up in their house at 100 watts without a master volume switch and still get along with your neighbor? So that's what this knob is here. Okay, so before we remove this from the chassis, what I do want to show you, these blue towers that you see here, especially if you've never seen this before, these blue cylinders, these are the filter caps that everyone's talking about, and these are what hold that high voltage, as much as 500 volts or more, and it can kill you if you grab onto these underneath and make an arc through your body. But this is the big danger everyone's talking about. You can touch the transformers, which are the big boxes. Don't be afraid to touch those. But under no circumstances do you grab on to these blue cylinders here. Again, not only can they hurt you, it can kill you. So, and I recommend, if you're kind of hesitant about doing this, this video will help you do this safely. But still, if you are not good with do-it-yourself projects like this, just take your amp to a tech. It's a lot safer and it's worth the money. If you're pretty good at do-it-yourself projects and you feel you can work safely, you have the right tools, then this video will definitely help you do this. So these are your power tubes here, and you can see I have 4 KT77 Genel X Gold Lions, and right now I am running 3 12AX7s here, which are preferred series 7025s from the tubestore.com. Actually, the whole package was from those. So next thing we're going to do is flip this around and remove it from the actual chassis. So we're actually going to flip it to the other end. So next thing we're going to do is remove this. You have 4 large screws on the back here, Phillips head screws, and you want to make sure that you have a good hold of this thing before you undo these screws, because this is one of the heaviest amps I've used. The reason why we flipped it is so that I can get my hand under this large transformer down here. But you want to be very careful not to touch this blue capacitor right here. I mean, you can touch the outside part of it, but I stay away from it altogether. I just don't like to mess with them. So, okay, we're just going to start by loosening these halfway. So I'm going to slide my hand under here. And again, don't be afraid to touch the transformer. They're not going to hurt you. I'm going to take some weight off of this, and then I can turn these screws out by hand. And we're just going to pull this out. You never want to touch anything with your hand or a tool underneath of the chassis by poking around in there. That's where all your problems are going to come from. So you can see I have this sitting upright. I'm going to check it to make sure it's sturdy. You don't want this thing falling, because again, if it falls, your reaction is going to be to grab it like this, and that's where you can run into problems. Okay, so this is the underside of the amp. Your bias pot that you're going to be using to adjust your bias after we change these power tubes is right there. It's that black box with the little white adjustment screw in it. You don't want to touch anything else inside of this amp. And don't poke around in there, see what things are. Just don't mess with anything under the amp at this point now. That's the only thing we're going to be working with, is that bias pot. Now I'm going to carefully remove these tube covers. And then we're going to gently pull our power tubes out. And one thing I recommend you do is that you get electronics cleaner that's safe for this type of thing. I like to use this Radio Shack electronics cleaner here. And you're going to take, I have a cheap EL34 tube that I use for this. I'll spray the pins and just work it in and out of each socket to clean the clean all the sockets. And I have a 12AX7 tube that I do it also. I'm not going to do it now because I already did it when I put the KT77s in here. I just did this last night. So we're going to be keeping these particular preamp tubes for now. They seem to sound pretty good in here, although I might switch over to, I didn't care for the JJs in here, so I might switch over to the tongue saws and try those for a while. As a matter of fact, I think I will put the tongue saws in too. So we have our new tubes ready to go. Now, in our very first socket here, I'm going to put our bias probe. And again, you can get these online for like 20 bucks, 25 bucks, even cheaper. Some I've seen them like as low as $10. And you can make one of these, but I would just buy one. It's a lot easier. We're going to take this and position it in the first socket. And we're going to be, and when you're working again, be very careful where you're putting your hands. We're just going to lay this over the transformer like this for now. And then we're going to take the rest of our new tubes and start putting those in the other slots. And these are Svetlana EL34s. It's a seriously underrated EL34. I like a good kind of classic rock tone, and these are pretty awesome tubes. Now, the first socket here that has our bias probe in it, this tube is going to plug into the top of it. The next thing we're going to do is I'm actually going to put these tube covers back on just to keep these tubes from moving. And then we're going to get our multimeters out. And you don't have to have two multimeters, you can use one, but I'll show you why I like to use two. We have all the tubes in, now we're ready to actually bias this thing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hook up our speaker load. And I have this set for 16 ohms. And then we're going to hook up our power supply. And still the amp is in the off position completely still. If you have two multimeters, you're going to want to have one on standby here, and the leads from your bias probe are going to go to it. That's going to end up getting set to milliamps. And that is what we're going to use to actually measure the bias as we're turning the bias pot. Your other multimeter, you're going to want to have the black with an alligator clip on it. And the other side, you can either have an alligator clip or just a regular lead like I have here. This is what we're going to use to find what's called the plate voltage. The next thing you're going to do, you're going to set this particular multimeter to volts, DC volts. And you're going to take your black lead, and we're just going to clip this black lead onto the metal chassis as a ground. Make sure it's secure and not sliding around. Okay, so we're going to reach around at this point and we're just going to turn the amp on. We're going to make sure that the bottom of the amp is clear from anything touching it. And everything's ready to go, everything's stable, and I'm going to flip this on. And we're just going to leave it, let it heat up a little bit. And now that we've let this heat up for about 60 seconds, we're going to go ahead and actually flip the amp on. Again, do not forget that you need a speaker load just like you would when you're playing the amp. You can use either a load box or your cabinet, but you must have a speaker load. That's super important or you're going to do some serious damage to your amp. We're going to go ahead and flip it off of standby. And now we are fully on. We're going to locate pin 3 of this power tube socket. Now the good thing is that they're marked. Pin 3 is this one in the center down here. It's right there. I don't know if you can see that, but pin 3 is the one right down there in the middle. You'll see the numbers marked on it. If yours are not marked by numbers, you just find where the key is. That's that slot that the tube kind of guides itself into, and count 3 pins clockwise, and that'll be pin 3. With the black lead still attached to the chassis, we're just going to take our red lead, the multimeter still set the volts, DC volts, and we're just going to touch pin 3 to get our plate voltage. And you can see right now it's coming up at 460 volts. Okay, so now that we have our plate voltage, we're going to use a little bit of a formula and a calculator to figure out what our bias should be on the power tubes. So these tubes are rated for 26 maximum watts divided by the 460, which was our plate voltage, and that gives us that. And then we're going to times it times 70% dissipation. So times 0.7, 39 is what our bias is going to be. That's what we're going to set the other multimeter to that has the bias probe hooked to it. Okay, so with a really tiny plastic or electrician's flathead screwdriver, we're going to use it to adjust this teeny little pot in here. Again, you don't want to touch anything else but this pot. And we are going to turn this ever so slightly to adjust the bias. All you have to do is just touch this a little tiny bit and that bias is going to move it. It's extremely sensitive, so don't just stick a screwdriver in there and wail away at it. It needs to barely have any tension on it for it to change the bias by 2, 3, 4 milliamps at a time. So we're going to keep an eye on our bias meter. We're going to see what it reads now and then bring it down to the 39 that we got from our equation. Okay, so this is as a default what it's coming up as right now. So we're pretty close to that 39, but we're just going to make a teeny adjustment counterclockwise on this little bias adjustment pot. Makes the numbers go down, and clockwise makes them go up. So we are going to barely turn this to the left, and you can see it going down, and it might fluctuate a little bit, so wait a minute, let it settle, and you can see looks like we're about good to go right there. I do recommend checking the bias and adjusting it after the amp's been on for 10 minutes, and then wait 20 minutes after you've set the bias with the amp still running, and check it again to make sure there hasn't been a huge fluctuation. And that's it. That's how easy. So congratulations, you just biased your amp. It should have been fairly simple. My bias reading is stable now at the 39, and we're going to go ahead and put this back together, fire it up, and see how she sounds with the new power tubes in it.